The book of Genesis 3 times says God remembers, but does he ever forget? Interestingly, at the center of the first quarter of the book of Genesis, it says that God remembered Noah and delivered him out of the flood. At the center of the second quarter of the book of Genesis, it says that God remembered Abraham and delivered Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah. At the center of the third quarter of the book of Genesis, it says that God remembered Rachel and gave her children. But at the center of the fourth quarter of the book of Genesis, it says that the chief baker did not remember Joseph when he was elevated to Pharaoh's house. What's the point of the book of Genesis? God always remembers his people, even when his people don't remember him. I'm Pastor Branson Villardo. We're going to be covering an interesting nugget from the book of Genesis that you can take out of its grand structure. If you haven't already, make sure you like this video and share it and subscribe to our channel for more great content just like this. Now, as I said in the intro, the book of Genesis can be divided into 4 quarters. The first quarter, and this is in the structure of the Hebrew. This is not something that we just make up or superimpose on the book. The first quarter tells the story from Genesis 1 through 11. That's the story of creation and the fall, ultimately to the Tower of Babel. Now, at the center of that quarter, structurally speaking, is a verse in Genesis 8 and verse 1. And in that verse, it says that God remembered Noah in the midst of the flood, and he caused the waters to recede so that Noah could once again live on the earth. The second quarter of the book of Genesis is Genesis 12 through about partway through Genesis 26. And that quarter is all about Abraham. But the center of that quarter is found in Genesis 19 and in verse 29, where it says that God remembered Abraham as he was destroying Sodom, Gomorrah, and the cities of the plain. And for Lot's sake, because Lot was amongst those cities, he stopped destroying those cities, or he relented from his anger upon those cities so that he could deliver Lot. That's the second time God remembers. The third time is at the structural center of the third part of the book of Genesis. Now, those are all the stories about Jacob. That goes from the second part of Genesis 26 all the way through ultimately Genesis 36. At the center of that, it says that God remembered Rachel because Leah, Jacob's first wife, was having a bunch of children. Rachel was upset she had no children, and so Rachel ultimately gave birth to Joseph because God remembered her. But what's interesting is what you find in the fourth quarter of the book of Genesis. Because you would think at the center there, you'd have God remembered somebody. Potentially Joseph, because from Genesis 37 through Genesis 50, the fourth quarter of the book of Genesis is all about Joseph. But interestingly, if you look at Genesis 40 and verse 23, which is the structural center of this fourth quarter of the book of Genesis, there's an interesting verse. It says this. It says, "Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but he forgot him." In other words, the chief butler who Joseph had prophesied to in prison and said, "You're going to get out of prison. You're going to go back to serving in Pharaoh's house." And Joseph said, "Just please remember me when you get out of here." It said the chief butler did not remember Joseph. So you have this contrast 3 times in the book of Genesis. God remembers Noah, delivers him. God remembers Abraham, delivers Lot. God remembers Rachel, gives her a son, Joseph. But when it came time for man to remember God's people, for man to remember what God had done, he forgot. The book of Genesis is all about remembering the faithfulness of God. And there's a key point hidden in the structure of Genesis, and that's this. God always remembers his people. But even when his people forget him, God's still faithful. Because though the chief butler did not remember Joseph, God remembered Joseph and elevated him out of prison into Pharaoh's house. I'm Pastor Branson Villardo. I pray this has been a blessing to you. Remember, God always remembers you, even when you've forgotten him. If you haven't already, make sure you like this video and share it to help us get the word out, and subscribe to our channel for more great content just like this.